Well, good evening, everyone, and good morning to so many others, wherever you might be joining us from around the world. My name is Beth Vanderwalker. I'm the Vice President of Operations for WorldWide HealthStaff Solutions, and we're really excited to be coming to you today to talk about some really important subjects. Please share with us in the chat where you're joining us from, because we're super excited to have you here. And I'm really excited to introduce two of our guests today. The first is Mukul Bakhshi. He is the Chief of Strategy and Government Affairs and the Director of the CGFNS Alliance. And then also with us is Kaley Cook. Kaley Cook is the Alliance Program Coordinator. And today we're going to be talking about your rights and working with recruitment agencies and why this is so important. A couple other exciting things that we want to share as we go throughout the presentation. If you would like to speak to a recruiter live and ask questions about coming to the United States, working in the United States, what that would look for you, we have a link right there at the top. You are welcome to hit that link. It will direct you to a live recruiter. But we're also going to be sharing some great information. So Mukul and Kaley, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Beth.
It is so good to have you here. And I'm really honored to be able to work with these wonderful people on the CGFNS Alliance. So I'm going to let you guys take us right into the presentation.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Beth. And, Beth, it's been a pleasure to work with her. As some of you might know, the Alliance, we're going to talk about it quite a bit, but Beth has been a board of governors member for us. And so we're so grateful for her support and continued leadership in helping the Alliance do the work that we're doing right now, which is talking to all of you about your rights and working with recruitment agencies. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the migration process. Some of you are probably very well steeped in this at this point and know everything there is to know about this, but I know some of you are probably earlier in your journeys, and so wanted to kind of talk about the migration process, what that looks like in the United States, and how CGFNS fits into that. And then Kaley's going to talk to you all about protecting and securing your labor rights when you're coming to the U.S., thinking about what contracts you sign, how you choose a recruiter, things of those sort. And from there, we'll open it up to discussion. Happy to answer questions and have kind of a lively discussion around some of the topics that I'm sure many of you are confronting and grappling with. Next slide. So some of you might be familiar with us. CGFNS at its highest level enables professionals to bring and use their education across borders. What does that mean? Well, you have your educational background in Nigeria or the Philippines or Lesotho or Saudi Arabia or wherever else. And how do you bring it to the United States? Well, CGFNS helps you bring those skills there to be used in the U.S. And the Alliance Division, which I'm the director of an Alliance and Kaley's the program coordinator for, is the flip side. When that's occurring, when you are bringing your credentials and coming across borders to come to the U.S. and work here, we want to make sure that happens fairly and ethically as defined by our code. Next slide. And just a little context on who CGFNS is. CGFNS was founded by the American Nurses Association and the National League for Nursing to help ensure that foreign educated nurses coming to the United States were able to succeed on board exams to be a nurse. In 1996, U.S. immigration law was passed that established the visa screen process that many of you have heard about. That's something that is required for employment-based visas. So if you want to get a visa as a nurse, you would need to go through the visa screen process. And CGFNS may be a part of your journey for immigration or licensure, not just to the U.S., but also potentially to Canada or New Zealand if those are countries you're considering as well. Next slide. Okay. So this is a very high-level slide that just kind of walks through the process. And as some of you know, all of these steps can take quite a while. This is not an easy process by any means. And so I certainly have talked to many of you and people who are in similar situations to you, and I know there are challenges at every step. And I think working with a great recruiter like WorldWide or some of the other firms that we certify ensures that there'll be someone to kind of navigate you through this process if that's what you choose to do. So, when you're getting a visa, what does it look like? Well, first you need an initial background screen. These are things for like security purposes, make sure you are who you say you are. And this is conducted by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Then we need to look at your credentials and make sure that they are what they're supposed to be. And so this includes things like your transcripts, your licenses, just to understand your education and registration background. And then you need an exam of nursing knowledge. This could be the NCLEX, which is ultimately needed for licensure in the U.S., or CGFNS's qualifying exam and certification program, which is an alternative to NCLEX. And then depending on what country you're coming from, most countries you would be required to have an English language proficiency requirement, like TOEFL or IELTS. And all of these kind of documents kind of come to CGFNS and are verified as authentic. Then they have to be evaluated. And there are two kind of ways in which they're evaluated. One is for immigration purposes, to get a visa to work in the U.S. And that's the visa screen process many of you might have heard of. There's also licensure, right, which is in addition to getting the visa at the national level to work in the United States, you also need a visa license to practice as a nurse in whatever state you'll be working in. And so CGFNS offers services like the Credential Evaluation Service. There are others as well. But this is to get a license to practice in your state board of nursing. So as you can see, there are a lot of steps in the process, and kind of concurrently you're thinking about both how do I get a visa to work in the United States and how do I make sure I have the things I need to get a license to practice as a nurse in whatever state I will be working in. Great. Next slide. And so this is just to kind of give you context on the numbers. The number of nurses who have come to the United States has increased quite a bit over the last few years. It obviously dipped in 2020. If we were to continue this chart, which we will be updating soon, it actually picks back up in 2021, and we're expecting kind of a major year for 2022. So this is a year in which we're talking about a lot of foreign educated nurses who are either coming to the United States or working on that process. Obviously, as many of you have heard, demand for nurses in the United States and around the world is incredibly high. Next slide. And, when we're talking about the weights to come here are actually lower than they've been in years. So visa retrogression is a concept that is really difficult to understand. It's complicated facet of immigration law. But basically, the way you can think about it, it's a long line, right? You get your documents, and then you're in a queue to get your actual visa to live in the United States. And those weights vary a lot by years. This is the weights for the EB3 category, which most nurses come under. And for most of the world right now, it's current. That means that the only delay is just the actual processing delay. There's no additional wait. From India, the waits are close to about 8 years, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually lower than it's been in quite a while. And for China, it's about 4 years. But if you're from any other country, meaning that your citizenship is from any other country, at this point, they are current. So again, there's still 6 months to 2 years roughly to get through the actual process, but there are no further delays, which is very different than it was just a few years ago. Next slide. And so I've been talking about the EB3 visa and stuff. I just want to step back and say, there are a bunch of visa categories. You obviously don't need to know all of them. It's complicated, and there are things around, which visa category is best. I would say either speak to an immigration attorney. You're always welcome to use the Alliance as a resource. We're obviously a nonprofit designed to help people like you make the right choices, or working with a recruiter. They can help navigate this process. But most are coming under permanent green card visas. About 60% of nurses come under those, or visa screen applicants. And so those are great because they enable you to get a green card and live permanently in the United States. They're obviously the kind of the gold standard for what people want. And those are the ones that most nurses are eligible for. Just a couple of other categories to mention. The TN visa is for people specifically coming from the U.S., from Canada or Mexico to the United States. This was called the Trade NAFTA visa, and it's part of a trade agreement between those three countries. So if you're from Canada or Mexico, that's obviously a very relatively easy path. And then there's the H-1B visa that we get a lot of questions about. It's one of the most well-known visa categories. It is a very difficult visa for most nurses. It's only eligible for advanced practice nurses to get. The benefit of that category is there's not really waits. It's kind of done pretty quickly in a process setting, but it is a lottery. So there's only a 1 out of 3 chance that a visa comes through, and it's not a permanent green card visa. It's a temporary worker visa. So that's obviously a very different situation. So in most cases, you'll be looking for a permanent green card visa, like an EB2 or EB3 is the categories. But certainly, you're not expected to know any of those. That's just for your context. Certainly speaking to someone, whether it be an attorney or a recruiter who knows the process in your individual case, will be helpful in terms of thinking through what category works best for you. Next slide. And so with that, I'd like to introduce, again, Kaley Cook, who's the Alliance Program Coordinator and who talks all the time with nurses like yourselves and other healthcare professionals about how to navigate this process in a way that ensures that your rights are protected and secured. So Kaley?
Great. Thank you, Mukul. Well, good morning from Philadelphia and good evening to some of you. Let's get started talking about protecting and securing the labor rights of nurses in the U.S. So when we're discussing this, there are a few initiatives that work together to promote ethical recruitment of health professionals around the world. And so there's a couple levels here. Up top, you can see things like the Global Compact for Migration, the ILO, the International Labor Organization, as well as the WHO has a code on healthcare recruitment. However, these are at a pretty high level. They're very international based. They're often oriented towards governments. And so where we think the Alliance for Ethical International Recruitment Practices fits in very well is taking a lot of those same ideas and putting them in a more specific context, in a national context, taking a lot of those things and making them a little bit more tangible as relevance to recruitment into the United States. So the Alliance works largely with our healthcare code. And I think we have that code to be shared with you today. So look out for that. Our healthcare code is a way to maximize benefits of foreign educated healthcare recruitment and to mitigate the harms that can come along with it. So what it does is it sets up best practice standards for the fair, transparent, and ethical recruitment of foreign educated health professionals into the United States specifically. And that means it can be set up for our legal, labor, and immigration practices, specifically in the United States. It was developed by voices from across the process, which can be recruiters, employers, nursing organizations, and labor representatives. We believe the code is important because health professionals that don't understand their legal obligations or their rights can be subject to problematic recruitment provisions, which can lead to things like breaches of contract later on or underutilization. By aligning these expectations better in the beginning, you can create a process that's better for both sides. The Alliance does our work in 3 main ways. The first one is informing and empowering professionals to make informed career decisions. We want you to have as much information as possible, as early in the process as possible, so that you can make the best decision for you and potentially for your family. We also certify recruiters who agree to comply with the code. So today we're here with WorldWide HealthStaff Solutions. They're a certified firm with the Alliance, which means that they've undergone a pretty rigorous application process to prove that they're in compliance with our code, and they've agreed to additional oversight during their certification period. We also develop and share research on recruitment issues, which allows us to see where things are in the landscape of recruitment and look at challenges and successes that nurses are having while they're migrating into the United States. Before we continue on, there's a couple of key context areas that I just want to go over. The first one is that migration to the United States can be managed alone. You can do it by yourself. Many choose to utilize a recruitment firm because it is a very lengthy process, it is a very expensive process, and it can be a very complex process, depending especially on your specific circumstances. So if you choose to utilize a recruitment firm, there are three, or if you choose to go the route of recruitment, there are three main models. The first one is direct recruitment by a hospital or health facility. And this would mean that you are working with a hospital or a health facility directly. They're helping you. You have a contract with that specific hospital. This is probably the least common route, right? Not a lot of hospitals engage in direct recruitment, really for the same reasons that a lot of migrants choose to use a recruitment firm. It's a time intensive process. It is complex and it's expensive also for the hospital. So they also turn to recruitment firms to fill in that gap. So when we're talking about the firms, there are two main models. We're going to start with staffing firms. Staffing firms are the most common firm that we see. Most of the nurses that we see coming into the United States are coming in through staffing firms. And that means that you would sign a contract with that staffing firm, and then they would send you to different health facilities that they work with. But your contract would be with the staffing firm. A placement firm is a little bit different, and it exists kind of in between direct recruitment and staffing firms. So the placement firm is going to help you find the hospital or the health facility, and then you're going to have a contract with that hospital or health facility. So it's a middle ground between the two. And I wanted to go over this because today we're here with the WorldWide HealthStaff Solutions, and they're a placement firm. And it's a little different, and it has a lot of benefits of using a placement firm. And some of the challenges that we're going to talk about over the next few slides aren't going to be as relevant for a placement firm. So I'm going to try to point those out along the way. If you have any questions about these different types of recruitment, please let us know in the Q&A at the end, and we're happy to go over those as well. Additionally, migration to the US can take years, as Mukul has already talked about. Depending upon your location, it's a very lengthy process. And additionally, healthcare in the United States is largely decentralized. And I know that this is different from a lot of areas of the world. There's a lot of private healthcare facilities in the United States, and there can be fragmented public investments, depending again on what state you're in. And we have a federal system that requires licensure by US state, which means if you came to the United States and you were working in Maine and you needed to move to New Mexico, you would probably have to have your credentials reevaluated and do certain steps of the process over again because that license might not be valid in another state. So as the Alliance works with recruiters and recruiters come to us and ask to get certified, one of the elements of that application process includes a survey of the nurses that they work with. It's really beneficial for us to talk directly to the nurses. It gives us a better sense of that firm. And it also gives us a sense of the challenges that nurses are facing as they're coming into the United States. So we collect that survey data and we put it together. And one of the questions that we ask is about an overall experience with their recruiter. So when we look at individuals that have used a certified firm, you can see here that 94% of the respondents have indicated a positive experience, and only 3% are indicating a negative experience. What we can hope that this illustrates is that, the use of ethical behaviors is really beneficial to creating a positive experience for nurses that are coming into the United States. I wanted to show you a little bit of a comparison. A few years ago, CGFNS did a much wider survey that was open to all recruiters and all individuals that had used any recruiter. And you can see the comparison here to the Alliance responses in the gray box. But you can see we're getting a lot more negative responses and fewer positive responses when we open that up to a wider pool of recruiters. So again, you can see here the ethical recruitment standards are really beneficial in creating a better process for those coming to the United States. Even though there weren't that many indicating a negative experience, we can still learn a lot from that. So when we take a look at the survey data that we have, you can see that most foreign educated healthcare professionals coming to the US were provided a copy of their contract. 98% of the nurses we talked to are saying that they were provided a copy of their contract beforehand. That's great. 97% are saying they were able to review it. And 85% are saying that they knew their hourly wage before they arrived in the United States. There are still a small fraction of healthcare professionals that are reporting that they had to pay a recruiter fee that they had to provide collateral to ensure that they completed their contract. Providing collateral means, putting up your house or your car or something and saying, I'm going to give this up if I don't complete my contract. And that is a very unethical practice. And if anyone's experiencing that, please reach out. Additionally, 3% are saying that they had their documents withheld. And the example that we give individuals is usually something like your passport, right? If your recruiter is taking your passport and hanging on to it for long periods of time, that is another red flag. There are a couple of other areas of concern that come up in our survey responses. The first one being unsatisfactory cultural orientation. There are a lot of nurses that feel a little bit blindsided when they come to the United States, or they feel that they don't have enough support when they arrive. It's a really big transition. We want to make sure that nurses are getting the support that they need when they arrive. Additionally, misunderstandings about contract length. When you're looking at a contract or signing a contract, it's really important that you understand how long that contract is for and how that's calculated, right? A lot of people think that it might just be a certain time period. If it's 3 years and it's from this day to this day, or is it calculated in hours? And that can mean things like taking time off or having additional orientation might elongate that contract. So that's important to know going in. Finally, the lack of awareness of breach fees. Breach fees are a fee that you would pay if you breach your contract early, right? So traditionally what we're seeing is employment contracts that are about 3 years long. And if you wanted to leave after 2 years, you would likely have to pay a fee to your recruiter. So knowing what that fee would be is very important when you're signing a contract, knowing if that's prorated. So if you're going to be paying less money if you were to breach your contract after your second year rather than, your first day, that's something that the Alliance requires. We do believe that those fees should be prorated based on the fact that you would have completed part of that contract. When we talk to nurses, always the biggest response group is saying that they don't know what their breach fees are. And this is a really important number. It's very important to understand when you're signing a contract because it can have a very big impact. There are a few areas that can impede nurses in their pursuit of career success as they're coming to the United States. So the first two are location issues and forced moves. And that would be if you are working, with a staffing firm and they have your contract and they've, assigned you to a hospital in Pennsylvania. And after 1 year, their contract ends in Pennsylvania and they want you to move to New Mexico. That's something that can happen. You'd have to, that can mean uprooting your family, uprooting your kids, and moving across the country. There's also the issue of bench pay. Bench pay would be if you are moving from, let's say Pennsylvania to New Mexico, are you being paid in between those contracts? If you're not working in your profession, but you're still under contract, are you still getting paid? I wanted to highlight these two issues because it's something that isn't as applicable to the placement model, right? So this is when you're choosing how you want to migrate, these are some things to keep in mind when you're considering the different models. One of the benefits is that if you know where you're going to be, you know where you're going to be working, some of these challenges can go away. There are a few other things to keep in mind. The term of your contract, right? So I think we've already mentioned that traditionally we're seeing 3 years. Anything over 3 years, please send us an email. That's not something we would traditionally see. Sometimes you see under sufficient cultural and clinical orientation. That's something to keep in mind as well, making sure that you're going to be set up to be successful in your role. Job alignment and progression. That can mean, are you going to be able to work in your chosen specialty? Sometimes that's not always possible. And we do hear that from nurses that are coming here. And then finally, those breach fees, understanding what your breach fee is. If it's a liquidated damage, so that would be, someone rounding up and saying $30,000 versus an actual damage, which might be $26,342, something a little bit more tangible. So we already talked about proration, but I just want to hit on that again. Making sure that your breach fee is prorated are all really important things to consider because they can really impede your career success if you don't understand those, particularly at the beginning. So we just wanted to end this section on a couple of things to consider in the next steps of your journey. And that, it's that question of whether or not you want to use a recruiter, the difference between the staffing and the placement firms, what are the benefits of each model, checking whether or not the firm that you're looking into is reputable, if it's certified by the Alliance, what are the contract terms, location, duration, specialty, how will this help me build my career development journey? What's the training like? How does it align with my job expectations and progression? And, also it's really just important to consider what trade-offs you're willing to accept, right? If you can't get everything you want, what are the most important priorities that you want to be looking at as you're considering that recruitment firm or looking over a contract? So now I'm going to pass it back over to Mukul for the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Kaley. That was wonderful. So before we begin the discussion, I want to kind of synthesize a bunch of what Kaley and I said and kind of what Beth mentioned in the introduction, right? Which is that, we're in a kind of a unique place in terms of time of the world, right? We're 2 years into a pandemic, and there are a lot of shifts in terms of demand and supply across that you should be aware of. And I think some of this might affect how you are considering your individual journey, and we're happy to answer those questions as well. So the first is this idea of a nursing shortage. So, that is something that has emerged across the world in the last year or two. But before that, we'd said, there's not really so much as a nurse shortage. There's like a maldistribution of nurses, meaning that there are pockets where there are nurses who are incredibly needed. And so that's something of what recruiters like WorldWide help address, is where there are pockets of shortages. Maybe it's, there's a shortage of rural ICU nurses in Oregon, and firms can bring nurses to those areas to fill those pockets. So thinking, there is an overall nurse shortage, but a lot of it depends on what's the specialty, what's the location, what's the seniority, and you're going to be wanting to work with your recruiter or employer to find where you can fill the pockets, because that's where you'll probably have the best opportunities to find positions that are kind of opportunities for growth or pay or things of that sort. The next thing is kind of COVID-19, right? And I saw some of the discussion in the chat. Hey, there's a massive pandemic and critical shortage of nurses. Why does everything take so long? And I don't have a good answer to that. In terms of if I were designing systems, it might be very different. I will say it depends a lot. We're talking a lot in the U.S. context. I know a lot of you are interested in coming to the United States. Other countries, the situation is different in that there's a lot of efforts to expedite the immigration of nurses. Now, the United States is unique in a lot of ways. I mean, I think it's I've talked to nurses who have had opportunities to go elsewhere, and I think there's a lot of reasons people want to come to the United States in particular. Those can include, from a job perspective, I think nurses are better compensated here and have more opportunities for growth in terms of scope of practice and things of that sort, and being a kind of a pivotal part of the patient care team. So I think that's there. And then from a family perspective, there's lots of reasons people choose to immigrate in the United States. That said, it's probably one of the harder places to pick to come to work here. So I get that's all to say that COVID has meant that a lot of other countries have created kind of fast tracks for nurses and other health professionals who want to come there. That is not the case in the United States. So there have been some things like interviews are being expedited for nurses when you're getting to that stage of the process. But when I talk about the visa categories, that's a general employment-based visa category. There has not been for almost 2 decades now a particular visa just for nurses. So you're in line with everybody else. And then, from a delay perspective, there's tons of people coming through. And so every part of the process is kind of breaking. You might have heard that there's kind of a labor supply shortage, not just in healthcare, but across all professions, from restaurants to government workers. And so all those branches are kind of facing low, including CGFNS, are facing a very difficult employment market and trying to keep and retain employees to do this stuff. Licensing authorities face the same thing. And then on top of that, demand is higher. In the last year, for example, 50% more people applied for that visa screen credential than they did the year before. Think about it, 1 year, 50% increase. and that's going to increase even more this year. So I think there's some struggles in terms of actually able to do the processing. As I mentioned before, the actual process right now is better than it's ever looked, right? There's no delays, the visas are current, etc. But everything from how do we get the license validation from your board of nursing, to how do we get the credentials from your school, to how do we arrange an embassy interview when they're short-staffed and thousands of people want to come. All of those steps, the process, how do you get testing seats? Those all involve delays. So I would just say be prepared for the delays. And if you're working with a good recruiter, they can help you navigate that, because I know a lot of the biggest issue is uncertainty. So having someone who understands the process and can walk you through that is really useful. So that's a good segue to kind of the last point I want to start before we kind of open up to your questions, which is what to consider in making a decision. And this is what Kaley just talked about, but I want to kind of hammer a couple of the key points here. One is the ethics and transparency of the recruiter. I think the recruiter you pick, if you choose a recruiter, is one of the biggest decisions you can make. So let's talk about it in two pieces. One is, should I use a recruiter? I would tell you that you need to think about that. And if you have particular circumstances, we're happy to talk to you about them to help you make that initial choice. But in general, this is a very difficult process with a lot of steps. So having someone who is expert to help navigate the process, and in a lot of cases pay a lot of the costs involved with that process to no initial cost to you, I think those are really valuable additions to you kind of dealing with that process. But then if you're going to use a recruiter, how do you pick one? Well, as Kaley mentioned, this is a very wide-ranging industry, and there are firms that I would be happy to work with, and there are firms that do things that are considered unethical or can put you in a really poor position. One of the things we talk most to nurses is that I wish I had known, right? I wish I had known before, what my, as Kaley said, the breach fees are, or that this was a good recruiter or a bad recruiter. And you are way ahead of the curve by doing this thinking now in this earlier stage in your process. So, picking someone that you trust, obviously, whether it be talking to people you who have worked with recruiters, that's a helpful value add. You might not know those people, and that's why the Alliance is here. We certify recruiters that go through a very rigorous certification process because they're committed to behaving ethically and to making sure that your rights are protected. This webinar right now is an example of that, right? We're providing this message to tell you, and WorldWide providing that platform for you to make the right decision for yourself. So then knowing what you're paying for, right? That's part of it too, right? So there are a lot of services that are being paid for to get you here. And so understanding, the model where you're essentially an employer is going to be paying for all those costs. I think that's helpful. And then knowing what costs you have to pay for. So if there are any upfront costs under the Alliance certification program, you should not be paying upfront costs. The recruiter would be bearing those for you. But if there might be some ancillary costs that you have to bear, such as medical or having an attorney review your contract or things of that sort. Whatever it is, you should know those costs and make sure you understand them. And then later, so Kaley mentioned damages or breach fees, right? Understanding what those are, how much they would be, how would they be calculated if it's an actual damage model. Those can all help you understand, what if this doesn't work out? What are the options I have there? So knowing what you're paying for, I think, is really important. And then being clear on your requirements more generally. Where can I work? As Kaley mentioned, there's a big difference between a placement model and a staffing model. With a placement model, you're working for an employer and you have a job at that employer. If you go the staffing model, which is still the most common model of nurses coming to the United States, you often are signing a contract that says you can work anywhere. And they might say you have a preference. We'll take your preferences into account. But if you say I want to work in Chicago and they don't have a contract in Chicago, they're going to send you to a different place. They might send you to Tennessee instead. Now, that might be okay with you, but just making sure you understand what those are is really important. And then for how long, right? As Kaley mentioned, there's 3 years kind of a standard. A lot of contracts are based on hours, not years. And if it's on hours, you understand how those hours are calculated, because the worst thing is if you think you have a 3-year contract, but based on hours, it ends up being 4 years. That's a pretty major shift where your obligation to the firm is increased quite a bit. So I guess if I had to summarize all of this, it's like, do your homework now, right? The choices you're going to make now are going to have a huge impact, not just as you get through this process, but for the first few years of your career in the United States. And so, talk to people, talk to the recruiters on this line, talk to us as kind of an independent source. But we recognize that whatever you choose will be really important, and making decisions now can make sure you have a much more successful career in the U.S. over time. And so with that, I want to thank Beth and the whole WorldWide team for giving us this platform, and all of you for coming here, your early mornings, your late nights, to come hear about this, and would love to hear your questions and any other topics you'd like to raise. So Beth?
All right, that sounds great. So we're going to take the slides down, but we do want to share with everybody in attendance today the webinar, the complete webinar, the slides. Everything has been recorded. We're going to post it. Anyone that registered for today's webinar, we're going to be sharing the presentation with you, the slides, everything. So we're excited to be able to get you that information. So a lot of things that you guys spoke about really resonated with me. I will share with everybody. I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for over 20 years, and ethics is just such an important part. I know for WorldWide, but even me personally. And that's why we do team up with the Alliance to make sure that we are setting ourselves apart as an ethical recruiter. And I will say we sit on that board with so many other of our competitors. And this is something that we're all very dedicated to. So a couple things I want to reiterate and we can talk about is, one, as you kind of move through this journey, if you want to go through the immigration process, one, make sure you are working with an ethical recruiter. You can find a list of those ethical recruiters on the CGFNS website. And this is probably the most important thing. The other thing that I do want to mention around ethics is ask a lot of questions. When you get these contracts, make sure that whoever sends you that contract, whether it's your recruiter, whether it's a hospital, placement, or staffing, feel free to reach out to that person, have a conversation, ask that person lots of questions, highlight anything on that contract that you don't understand. If they are not willing to be 100% transparent, share the information with you, that's a red flag. You need to be aware of that. One of the things that I can speak to WorldWide, we don't withhold passports. That is a big red flag. That's something Kaley said. Don't allow that to happen for yourself. You should know the wage that you're being guaranteed once you arrive. The wonderful thing is most hospitals offer the prevailing wage. Many offer more. We understand it takes most cases for that EB3 visa 2 years to get through the entire visa process. And normally right before you come, your wage could go up if you've continued to increase your experience. So know those wages. And I will say at WorldWide, that's one thing that's really important to us. We're looking at those contracts. The contract you sign is the same contract that any nurse at that hospital would sign. With the staffing agency, the contract you sign would be with that staffing agency. So ethics is a really important part of this. Where would be the best place for them to find a list of those ethical recruiting agencies?
I am going to be putting the website link in the chat. I'm just adding it in. So you'll be able to find it on there. There's a link on our homepage that's to the code, and there's a link to our certified recruiters.
Right. That's excellent. And, for those of you that joined us as WorldWide, we would love for you to consider us as your agency. We do direct placement. We work with those hospitals so that when you get here, you're going to know where you're working. You're not going to be moving around. You're going to be able to establish roots here and to be able to do your contract. We also have no breach fees in our contracts, but look for those things that were brought out in the video. The other great thing that I did, let's have a discussion around, was we talked about navigating the process. I will share the U.S. immigration process. It's very complicated. It's very detailed, and it's also very time consuming as well. I saw several questions asking, why does it take so long to do this process? And I think you hit the nail on the head. A lot of it, a lot of the parts of the immigration process, there's a lot of departments that are involved with that, and a lot of different government agencies that take you through. I will say some of the resources that WorldWide offers, and we can talk about CGFNS resources as well. We have recruiters that work directly with you, getting you those contracts. If all of your documents are submitted in a timely manner, we can file those petitions right away. The average time in the U.S. does take 2 years for an EB3 visa. Some of the other visas do take a little bit less, but the great thing about that EB3 visa is that you're a permanent resident. You get to be here, you're a permanent resident, and in about 5 or so years, if you've been here and everything looks great, you can actually apply for citizenship as well. So look for the resource. Who you sign up with should have a team of resources. All of our nurses actually have case managers. So all of our case managers, we can provide you list of the timeline, all the documents that need to be submitted, all of the direct links, and our hospitals actually pay your immigration fees. So that works really good. CGFNS also has some great resources for nurses on their website as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, we thank you, Beth. We do have a bunch of resources. I will say there's no comparison to working with a good recruiter. They're going to help navigate you throughout all of the process. We have a list of resources on our site that include links to different areas, and of course the Alliance tells you about a lot of what we said right here on our website in terms of how to choose a recruiter. You can read the code that is included here, and then you're of course welcome to email Kaley. And then we could answer questions by email or set up time to talk about those. But I mean, those are kind of one-off questions. I think at the front end of the process, as terms of how you get through it, I would say either work with a recruiter that really has that team of resources, or if you choose to do it on your own, make sure you're able to hire the right resources to kind of walk you through this process, because it is quite difficult with a lot of kind of rabbit holes that could delay your processing.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And then we are very lucky. We have an amazing onboarding. We call it our onboarding team. It's that arrival to the USA team that can help you with everything from housing, relocating, understanding American culture, understanding how to set up bank accounts, how to get resources of healthcare, and so many great resources, and we provide all of those included with everything that we're doing. So lots of great things. Let's take some questions from everybody that's been chatting. So I'm going to invite Tracy in and see what questions that you have for us as well today.
Hello. Greetings, everybody. Tracy Drake, Communications Manager here at WorldWide HealthStaff Solutions. I see questions coming in, and I just want to pose some of these questions to our panel here. One of the questions that came in, guys, is, the first one is simply asking, do you need the diploma and the transcripts from their university? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. I'll take the first part. So as a nurse, to be able to work in the United States as a registered nurse, one of the main tests that you have to have, and this is true for anybody that's practicing in the United States, is the NCLEX exam. The NCLEX exam is a nursing exam. You can take this exam all over the world. It's offered in many facilities. And once you pass that exam, that allows you to work as a nurse in the United States. To be able to qualify for that exam, you have to show that you have graduated from a nursing school that meets all the qualifications around education. And do you guys want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I'll take this one, Mukul. Actually, I previously worked at CGFNS as a credentials analyst. So I'll tell you that you do need to submit your diploma and your transcripts from the university. That's what we'll take and review, and then we will determine if your education is comparable in the United States. And what CGFNS does is then generate a report that's advisory for the state board. And the state board for the state you want to work in then makes the determination about whether or not you're able to sit for the NCLEX, like Beth mentioned. So both of those are really important. If it's your high school diploma, sometimes that's something that you would be able to supply. However, your transcript is something that's going to need to come directly from the university. And sometimes that's something that can add to the length of time in the processing here, because as you can imagine, coordinating that can be time consuming.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Next question. This is regarding the ETA 9089. So does the ETA 9089, how long does it typically take to be approved?
What we are seeing, we have several nurse aides that are going to be joining us, and they're going through the immigration process as well with nurse aides. You have to have that nursing experience background, but you don't have to have the NCLEX. What we are seeing is that average timeline for the ETA 989 is about 6 months. That also depends on how the Department of Labor, if it's backed up, what their influx is, but we're seeing about 6 months for that. Once that is completed and approved, the next step would be filing the I-140 documents, and many employers are paying for that premium processing. So at that point, your process would go much faster. But there are those little pockets that slow us down at times.
Excellent. What is the length of the labor certification after it's been submitted? Yeah. This one is regarding the Board of Nursing for New Mexico. All right. This person has their CES report since 2018 using the Board of Nursing New Mexico. Will they need to reevaluate now if they want to proceed with their registration for the NCLEX RN?
Mm-hmm. So I will share, while I am not an expert on every state's Board of Nursing requirements, I can give you a little information about the boards of nursing. And I'd love, Mukul and Kaley, your feedback as well. Every Board of Nursing in every individual state works very independently. It is not one Board of Nursing that's the same for every state. So in each state, they have their individual requirements and rules and regulations. They have a board that meets on a regular basis, and at times they do update their requirements. At WorldWide HealthStaff, we have nurse licensure specialists. They work with the Board of Nurses from all 50 states. And what we do is we keep a database of all of the rules and regulations for each one of those boards. You can reach out to our resources, learn more about your specific Board of Nursing. We also have a wonderful tool on our website. It's an algorithm. And what it does is you can go in and ask individual questions about your scenario. It's a series of yes and no questions about where you're at the process, if you've taken the NCLEX, which state you're going to. And at the end of the algorithm or the end of the Q&A, it will let you know what all of your individual requirements would be. And then it also provides you the link to that specific Board of Nursing. So what I would encourage you to do is go to our website, go through the Q&A about your nursing license. That's going to give you a lot of information. It's going to give you the link and the details to each Board of Nursing. That may be a great first start. Any other comments from y'all on that as boards of nursing?
So I'll just caveat this by saying I haven't done credentialing in a few years now, but at the very least, the CES reports used to only be valid for 1 year. So in this case, you would need to get a reevaluation just to update that for the board. And then to Beth's point, it is possible that their requirements may have changed. So in the meantime, there is a small chance that there would be an update. But just to the question of whether or not you need a reevaluation, the answer, I believe, is yes.
The other thing that I will share with everybody, it is we provide resources. There's so many great resources on the internet. Please also, if someone shares information with you, they tells you this is what they believe to be true, please check for yourself as well. We try to provide the most up-to-date information, but it can change. Ultimately, getting your license on that piece is making sure you apply there. And there's resources out there to help you.
Good. By the way, the online tool to check for your nursing licensure is just posted. The URL is available in the chat. So if you want to click on that, take a look. You can go ahead and see how that's working. Yep. Next question. If you graduate as a college student from nursing, can your education be evaluated and accepted by CGFNS? That's the question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. If you've graduated in nursing, it would be dependent a little bit upon what country and the specific program maybe. But by and large, nursing education, there are certain aspects of other medical fields that we wouldn't be able to evaluate, but nursing we should be able to take a look at and get more information on.
Okay. Outside of nursing, what other healthcare professions would you work with? For example, nurse aides, and RNs, all your technicians, technologists. Do you work with everyone? Is there a limitation?
Yeah, so I will share on the worldwide side, we do work really closely with med lab technologists, technicians, nurse aides, registered nurses, and we have helped several physical therapists as well be able to come to the United States. And then I'll let you guys speak for CGFNS.
Great, thank you. So, we work with nurses primarily, and then the allied health professions, so physical therapists, clinical lab scientists, occupational therapists, speech language pathologists, etc. We don't work as closely with or have a certification program for things like nursing aides, etc. But that said, if you have questions around contracts and things like that, we're still happy to help on those.
Okay, thank you. And Beth, does WorldWide HealthStaff Solutions help their applicants with a CGFNS registration?
Yeah, we do. We make sure that you get all of your education credentials reviewed through CGFNS. We can send you that link. We work directly with you to make sure all of that's completed.
Excellent. Excellent. A lot of questions coming in regarding nurse aid. So I'll go ahead and answer this one. The question is how much time for the whole process for nurse aid? Simply because there are a limited number of nurse aid positions and so many applications for nurse aid, it can be a little bit of a longer process as opposed to registered nurse. So just keep that in mind. So the typical process, immigration process for nurse aid would be anywhere around 18 to 24 months from interview to arrival in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The last question that I wanted to pose to you guys, if you could just kind of go back to what you were talking about earlier about breach of contract and just elaborate a little bit more, maybe some things you've seen lately about breach of contract and how you've handled that.
Yeah. From the worldwide perspective, we are a direct placement agency. So broadly, I'll share how our contracts work. Most of our contracts are also 3 years. Your agreement is directly with the hospital that you're going to be going to. When you interview, you're going to know which hospital, which location that you're interviewing to work at. You can do all of the searches. We also provide information sheets around that. So if it is an area of the country that you would love to live and work in, you would be knowing that ahead of time. If what we have available is not an area that you would be interested in, we have many other areas that you could apply to as well. But once you commit to that location and that hospital, then once you get here, you're there for 3 years, which is great. If you're not looking to be misplaced or moved around or have short times. Personally, as a nurse, I have worked both. I've worked staffing and I've also worked directly with a hospital. In my personal situation, I had a family, I had children, and moving around wasn't a great option for me. Being at one location, having a set amount of hours, that was a great fit. I knew what I was going to make every week. I knew who my coworkers were, and I could really become very familiar with the processes and the rules and the regulations of that facility. So that was a great fit for me in that. With our contracts, it's 3 years. And it's time-based. For every month that you're at that facility, you work off a percentage, 1/36th or, of that agreement. It doesn't matter if you've taken time off to be with your family, but you're still an employee there, you're still working off that contract. So it's really just based on that length of time. And there is no breach of contract. If you leave for any reason before that 3 years, you just pay the difference of the time that you didn't work. You have all of those fees. They're upfront. They're in their contract. There are no hidden fees there at all. For many of the hospitals, they pay for all of your immigration fees, your relocation, your flights, and many times that first 30 days of housing as well to help you get established. And all of those will be really clearly listed in your contract. And there is no breach of fees in the WorldWide HealthStaff contracts. We make sure that is standard for any employer, any hospital that we work with. For staffing agencies, I'm probably not going to be the best to speak on it, so I'm going to pass this on. But a lot of it is based on hours. And if you take time off, then you're not working down those hours. And there is an expectation that you would complete it. A breach of fees means if you break it, not only are you paying for any of the time that you did not work, but also an additional fee on breach. And am I speaking correctly? I don't want to misspeak.
Yeah, I think in both cases, breach fees are based on the damages or the costs that are incurred. So I think, certainly any Alliance certified contract would be based only on the breach fee is based on the costs that were incurred by the staffing firm or other employer in terms of the recruitment. But I think you highlighted a couple issues. So a breach fee is just when you leave a contract earlier. It's called for breaching the contract, breaking the contract. And the fee is based on some assessment of what the costs were incurred by the employer, the damages incurred by them. And so I think you highlighted what the issue is the biggest reason why nurses breach is some misalignment of expectations. Something was different than what you thought beforehand. And so the more you can understand beforehand, the better, right? So if you know where you're going and what the facility's like and what your coworkers are like, you're much more likely to be happy than if you have no idea and you could be working in any hospital anywhere in the country. And even if you're okay with that, when you're signing the contract, maybe 2 years in, you get, situated in your new city, and then that staffing firm's contract with the hospital ends, and you're suddenly forced to move for the last year of your contract, for example. So I think that's the most common thing is misalignment in terms of those cases. But we've heard all kinds of extreme examples. And this is where it's really important to work with a good recruiter, can navigate when some of these issues happen, right? Things like harassment at work or bullying at work, when someone had to leave. We've had cases where people were supposed to be doing totally different jobs than they expected. And, they were expected to be in the ICU and they were doing med surge for a long time, things of that sort, where there was just, a misalignment of what someone thought was going to happen. So I think, that's important to avoid. You'll see if you search, there are some horror stories out there. And this is where a really good recruiter can help because they can be your advocate when issues arise at the employment site.
Yeah. And I will say that for WorldWide as well. Even though you are an employee of that hospital, if you ever run into a scenario in your workplace where you're not happy, where you feel like there's unethical treatment, if it's not what you expected, always reach out to that original recruiter. They can support you through it. We keep a relationship with all of our hospitals, with all of our nurses, whether you've been there for 1 day or whether you've been there for 2.5 years. We want to help support you and make sure it's a smooth process. However, I will share, in the United States, we do have this shortage. And one of the things we hear is it's busy. There is a shortage. That is why hospitals are recruiting. And that's why international recruitment right now is so popular. We understand you may be getting, as you come over, it's going to be really busy. And nursing around the world, I think that's what it looks like. So know what to expect. Speak to other nurses. There's some great platforms on social media worldwide. We have some great information. We team with nurses. They share their own experiences. So follow the WorldWide HealthStaff Facebook, we have an Instagram, YouTube, just anything where you can interact with other nurses and learn for yourself how many great benefits there are out there for this process. Because the thing that I think brings me most joy and CGFNS is to have the nurses come, arrive, get your green card, and create this new, wonderful, beautiful life where you can be happy and work and share your skills with the rest of so many of the patients that you touch every day. We thank you for that. I think that puts us at our time limit. Thank you, both Mukul and Kaley and Tracy, for helping us today to teach and to train and to moderate all the information around immigrating to the United States and working here in healthcare. We thank you again. This presentation will be sent out to you. If you would like to speak to a live recruiter, the link is at the top. We will also be sharing it. We hope to hear from you very soon. Best of luck in your journey and have a wonderful day wherever you are in the world.